Most women do not even think about testosterone affecting their metabolism and their body composition, and that could be a huge reason you feel stuck. So today, we are talking about why healthy testosterone levels matter in women, how they can affect your metabolism and fat loss, and why low testosterone is often a sign of a deeper stress problem.
I wanna feel like I'm close to something real, somewhere I belong.
If you are new to the show, my name is Gavin Scribolito. I'm a functional health coach helping women to stop fighting their bodies and start understanding them. And my mission is to make health, nutrition, training, and mindset all seem simple and doable. I've helped over 200 women transform their body, mindset, and their health using our root method, which is where we address the root cause of underlying issues to help your body finally respond and heal. Let's get into the topic today, which is going to be addressing why testosterone is oftentimes overlooked in women. And I think that a really big thing this comes down to is from just in general, if people hear testosterone and they think of men, since it is our predominant hormone. But when it comes to women, most of the time, things like estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, thyroid, all those things are like much bigger focus, especially when you go on social media. Now it's really all you hear women talking about when it comes to women's hormonal health. And testosterone oftentimes is never even addressed. I mean, if you go and type in hormones into Instagram, I guarantee you find everything regarding reproductive cycles and estrogen and progesterone, but you see nothing regarding testosterone. And I think that the more we can start to actually understand the impacts of testosterone in women's physiology, the more women are going to start to see better results because of that, because this is a really massive driver for metabolic function that really gets often overlooked. And I think the more women start to understand that testosterone levels, although you have them in much smaller amounts, are still super important to have even in optimal ranges. And I think that when it comes to like labs, for example, oftentimes they're looked at as like, oh, well, you're in range, but that range is absolutely astronomical. It's way too broad. And by the time you get out of that range, you're already likely feeling absolutely terrible. And this really comes down to how we can fuel your performance and also your recovery. Now, there's quite a lot of mechanisms that testosterone actually plays in women's metabolic health. Number one, it's a main driver of muscle, right? And more muscle you have, the more your metabolic rate is going to increase. And this is oftentimes why women that you see who are, more physically fit or have more muscle on their bodies, they tend to be able to consume more calories. And it's because of that muscle on their frame. It's more metabolically active. And if we have low testosterone, we have a decrease in muscle retention and also strength that's going to drop. So that's going to lead to lower energy levels, and body composition becomes much harder to actually be able to transform due to the fact that the more muscle you have in your frame, the more improved body composition you're going to have. And this doesn't mean that, you need to look bulky or jacked, right? Due to the fact that you have lower levels of testosterone, it's pretty difficult to get to that point. When we're talking about women building muscle, think of just like, your typical, like, fit, like, you can probably find a number of them on Instagram that they just like, they lift heavy, they like, they look fit, you look toned, that word gets thrown around a lot, where you can see muscle definition, but you don't walk around with like, your traps touching your neck, like there's a really big difference. I don't think a lot of women think that like they're going to get bulky by focusing more on building muscle, when in which case, even for a man, it takes a while to build muscle. So keep in mind, with women having a fraction of the testosterone levels that men have, that's going to require decades of hard training, being super on top of your nutrition. Ask any female, wellness competitor or bikini, or, even if a woman does end up taking, enhancement drugs to be able to build more muscle, even then it still takes time. So I think that we need to just kind of create a clearer picture as far as what muscle growth and retention actually looks like and actually can do for your metabolic health. So that's obviously a really big one, but we also see that testosterone can actually play a role in insulin sensitivity, and low levels of testosterone can actually contribute to what is known as insulin resistance, which is actually the impairment of glucose metabolism, which can increase fat storage, and for a lot of women that usually ends up more so around their abdomen. So insulin resistance is a really big one, something that can 100% impair your body from actually being able to adequately burn body fat. It actually will keep your body in more of a fat storage state due to the fact that insulin is going to kind of suppress your lipolysis, which is where your body is actually going to be burning body fat. Your body's ability to actually utilize fatty acids from your adipose tissue for energy is getting suppressed when there is insulin. So when you eat a meal, that is going to be suppressed. Your body is going to go into storage mode, which is not a bad thing. Insulin is also going to be what is shuttling glucose to your muscle cells to fuel them to be able to actually perform. It's what's also getting your mitochondria filled with enough substrate to actually be able to convert fuel substrates like glucose into ATP so your body can operate. It's also getting amino acids to your muscle cells. So a lot of people hear of insulin and it gets demonized a lot, but it's, any hormone in excess or being suppressed is going to be a problem. And that's why we need everything in a very, good and optimal balance. And insulin is one of those things where we want to make sure we have good insulin sensitivity. And if we do not, that can impair fat loss. So we can see that start to lead to a harder time with losing body fat if we have lower testosterone levels due to that. We can also see that testosterone actually helps regulate your mitochondria health, which is the cellular process that actually converts food into energy. All of your cells have a mitochondria, and it consists of roughly about 80 to 90% of energy production in the body. So the health of your mitochondria is quite literally, if we're talking about what your metabolism actually is, your mitochondria plays one of the biggest roles in your metabolic rate, because it's quite literally how every cell in your body converts energy into ATP so your body can use that. And low levels of testosterone can actually impair mitochondrial function, which can reduce overall energy expenditure. So now your body is going to essentially be burning less calories in a day, slowing that metabolic rate down. This can also obviously affect your motivation, your drive, your libido, energy, recovery. All of it's going to impact your consistency as well. And this typically is where it's going to start to get harder to stay more consistent. We can also see that for women going through peri or post-menopause, testosterone decline is on an average rate trending downward. And it's even more so prominent in women who are maybe, overtraining, under eating, chronically dieting. And we can see that suppression, start to kind of, jump a little bit quicker downstream. And this is a really big contributing factor for a faster metabolic slowdown. So also contributing to women noticing that weight gain. And, even with being consistent with diet and exercise, it feels like, nothing they're doing is working. They're just packing on pounds and they don't know why. That's why so many women struggle. It's kind of like a silent metabolic killer, I call it, because that low testosterone, not being that no women are really looking at that or thinking that that's going to play a role, that can be impairing insulin sensitivity, mitochondria health, and making it harder for you to even see progress, not to mention the other shifts that we're having going through menopause alone. So we need to understand the relationship with testosterone playing a role in your metabolic health can be very, very crucial. Now, a lot of this can show up in, a lack of progress, despite eating well and training consistently. We can see a harder time building or maintaining muscle. We can also see fatigue, brain fog, lower motivation, poor recovery, low libido, lower confidence levels, and it can kind of feel like your body just isn't really responding the way that it used to, and it can get really, really frustrating and start to, lead women to almost want to give up and feel like no matter what they do, they're just never going to get the results that they want. And unfortunately, doctors really aren't helping with this due to the fact that the reference range for testosterone is so low and high for women, and it's just as bad for men too. By the time your levels are, out of range for a doctor to even consider doing anything, you're already at a point where it's you're suffering just to, even get anything. And, I think it's really important to note though that The problem with relying on the medical system to optimize your health is that they're not there to optimize your health. They're there to save it, right? So they're looking for things to already be so massively out of range and a problem so they can actually address the symptoms of what you're experiencing. Whereas when I'm looking at a lab work and I am training my coaches to look at lab work, we're looking at like, okay, cool, what is the trend, and how can we prevent this from getting to that point? Right? Like, are we already out of a much tighter range of where most women are going to start to experience a lot of those symptoms? And how can we be able to get that back into an optimal range where they can start to feel better, right? As opposed to waiting for it to end up so out of range that, like, they have barely any testosterone left and they just feel like absolute crap. So we need to understand that there is two different sides of the story of what is actually optimal and what is actually in range when it comes to labs, and how that might actually show up in your biofeedback and how you're feeling. Now, there's a lot of things that can also be driving testosterone down in women. These are things we have to be looking at when it comes to why your testosterone levels are low to begin with. Okay, now going through peri and postmenopause, again, even just naturally, you're going to see a reduction in androgens as you age. Men see this, it's actually called andropause. You will see a decline in testosterone as you age, the same way that you see a decline in your estrogen and progesterone as you go through menopause, right? You have to keep in mind that your ovaries also are producing testosterone to some degree. Right? So if ovarian function is declining due to menopause, you're going to see a reduction in total testosterone just due to that alone. That then relies on your adrenal glands, which produce DHEA and a little bit of androstenedione. That's a mouthful. Look that word up. Those are precursors to your testosterone. Okay, specifically DHEA. Downstream is going to convert into the substrate needed for testosterone and your androstenedione. Androstenedione. That is, I can never say that word correctly. I've heard it pronounced so many times, but that is another precursor to testosterone. They both come from your adrenal glands, and when your adrenal glands start to become heavily relied on for that, testosterone production, we can start to see obviously that decline, and we can start to see impacts also, on your adrenal glands, where we can see it kind of, getting strained a little bit more, which is also why prominently a lot of women going through menopause, outside of the stressful variable of the ovarian decline on your body, we actually see that you can have higher levels of cortisol going through menopause as well, due to the fact that there is much more of a focus on your adrenal glands kind of picking up some of that slack, especially from that testosterone side of things. But we also have HPA axis dysfunction, which is your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Okay, this is how your brain communicates to your pituitary gland in your brain, and then also communicates with your adrenal glands. And your brain communicates with your pituitary for every system. We also have your gonad hormones, which is obviously communicating with your ovaries. We have your HPT axis, which is communicating with your thyroid. So you can see how one system, if that starts to be flawed or starts to get impaired, we can see that start to have a downstream effect actually on all of your other systems. That's kind of what we can see here, is that your body will start to shift away from performance and recovery, and we'll start to see some downstream effects from there being HPA axis dysfunction, which is basically to say that you have chronic stress load, right? Again, going through menopause is stressful. If you have other stressors in your life going on, if we're overtraining and not recovering enough, that's also another stressor. Too much intensity or volume in your training with not enough sleep or deloads incorporated into your training can drive hormonal disruption or hormonal suppression. And what we can actually see is that when we have a higher cortisol pattern, that's going to disrupt your brain from actually starting to send a signal to your pituitary gland, which is your gonadotropin releasing hormone. And that tells your pituitary to release LH, luteinizing hormone, and FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. And LH specifically is what is going to also start to trigger the production of your sex hormones, such as estradiol, testosterone. And what we can see is that if we are having an impairment in your overall cortisol levels, if we have dysregulated patterns there, or we have high cortisol or low cortisol from prolonged periods of being under stress, we can see that that's going to start to affect your brain from actually communicating with your pituitary and sending that releasing hormone to trigger the release of your luteinizing hormone. We can actually see that that is going to downstream affect testosterone production. We can see that start to affect, even estrogen, progesterone as well is typically going to become impaired by that due to the fact that under stress, that's going to start to affect ovulation. If you do not ovulate, you will not have healthy progesterone levels because you need ovulation in order to actually produce progesterone. So they can start to cause this whole downstream effect. And now what happens is if we have adrenal axis dysfunction, so adrenal glands are overproducing, we can see that over time, under chronic stress, DHEA, which is also, again, keep in mind, an adrenal hormone, is going to downregulate. Now you don't have enough precursor to be able to actually convert into testosterone from the adrenal glands. And you also are having ovarian dysfunction from the decreased LH output coming from your pituitary gland, which is going to now reduce testosterone as well for you. So this is a whole cascade of events. You can see this can all start to add up to lowering those testosterone levels. And it all comes back to stress. Under eating is another very common stressor. Low energy availability tells the body to conserve energy. And this is not just going to impact your overall testosterone levels, but this can also directly impact your thyroid, which also plays a massive role in mitochondrial health and in your body actually converting energy substrates into fuel. We can see that start to affect your sex hormones, your metabolism due to the impairment on that mitochondrial health. And we can start to see that how low testosterone is not just this silo where it's just in its own corner and it's contributing to things. It's likely pointing to there being much deeper issues. Now, this is the whole premise here is it's not about chasing one hormone. It's about looking at the system as a whole. And we need to take into consideration that the goal is not just to, see one number in isolation improve. We want to look at how is the body functioning as a whole. When we look at lab work, we can see this pattern of how this system is being suppressed due to this system being hyper, in a hyperfunctional state, like, high cortisol suppressing thyroid, or low cortisol could be, suppressing thyroid as well, due to the fact that we might be in a later stage of what is known as adrenal insufficiency, where your adrenal glands have been having such a high output for so long because you've been under so much stress that eventually it just bottoms out. We see low DHEA, we see low cortisol. We can also typically see hypothyroidism with that. We'll see, obviously, usually anovulatory cycles where there's no progesterone being produced due to the fact that your body does not feel safe enough to even ovulate. So that can start to cause things like estrogen dominance. We can start to see impairments in gut health and gut dysbiosis, which can start to affect estrogen metabolism. It can all start to paint this picture into just this whole hormonal cascade of issues. And, in certain instances, could something like TRT be beneficial? Yes. Menopausal women, keep in mind, as you go through that, you are going to be seeing the gradual decline of that. And for some women going through menopause, it could be very beneficial to actually address, possibly using TRT. But I'd say there's a lot of things that come before that as well. Like, what does your lifestyle choices look like? What does your training look like? What does diet look like? What does sleep look like? There's so many things that could be suppressing that. What is your thyroid health looking like? What does cortisol look like? We need to look at, are there any other systems that are possibly being suppressed or in a hyperfunctional state that could be, driving that low testosterone before we start to even address the possibility of needing something like a TRT, right? But if you're especially not in menopause, it would require looking further into that even more, drastically. No matter what, that should be the first step that we take. But no matter, what we have to take into account is that low testosterone is a signal that the body needs support. It needs to be looked deeper at. We need to look at other mechanisms that could be at play and not looking at more punishment. Okay. Now, when we're talking about actually starting to alleviate these things, like I had mentioned, we have to think in terms of the root method as a whole, which is the whole premise of it, which is recover, optimize, overcome, transform. In recover, we obviously have things like improving sleep, reducing your stress, and supporting overall nervous system regulation. We have optimizing your diet through fueling your metabolism to support that level of training that you're having, supporting better recovery, and obviously optimizing hormonal balance. Overcome is where we're going to really focus a lot of letting go of that more cardio, less food kind of mindset that typically is what is going to put your body into that stress state, and as a whole for a lot of women. And from there, then we can actually, once the body is optimized and we have things functioning from all cylinders, then we can start to focus on, okay, cool, how do we transform the body now? That's going to come down to, focusing on building more muscle, smarter recovery, smarter training, so that way your metabolism actually has the support to be able to actually, produce the results that you want, right? So that's what we have to take into account, is that your metabolism is not something that's like, your body doesn't hate you. It's responding accordingly to the environment and is adapting to what you have, the stress load that you're putting it under. And your body's always going to prioritize survival. So when we see these hormonal adaptations, it's your body trying to survive to the environment you're placing it in. And if you want better results, oftentimes in situations like this, it's going to look like less is more, right? As opposed to more training, less food type of an idea, right? We need more food, we need less training. It's kind of flipping that script almost, which can feel unnatural and wrong. But in reality, that's what your body is really craving, is better recovery, more fuel, less energy output, and just smarter overall approaches to what you're trying to do. Now, as always, I'm always going to give you some sort of action tips that you can take away from this and start to actually, implement certain steps into your own life. And I think that if your strength, if your libido, if your energy or body composition has changed in a way that you do not like, it's important to stop assuming that, especially if you're going through menopause right now or anything, that it's just your age, right? Start asking better questions and looking deeper into understanding what is actually at play here. And, we need to look at the full picture, not just looking at, obviously, again, one number in isolation. We need to look at the whole system, connecting the dots between lab work, but we also have to look at biofeedback and lifestyle things of how is stress, how is your food intake, what does training load look like, how is your cycle health if you're still cycling, and labs, not just calories and what the scale is doing. Okay. But a really quick tip that we can kind of take, away from this is that let's look at just a few variables here, right? If your sleep is sub 7 hours, if your caloric intake is below 70% of your maintenance, and if you don't know what that is, you can find a calorie calculator online and calculate where your maintenance might be, track your food intake for a week and get an idea of where you at relative to where your maintenance might be. If you're below 70% of where that estimated maintenance is for your height, age, weight, sex, and activity level, then that's a really good indication that you probably shouldn't be focusing on fat loss right now if you're not seeing results even being that low. We also want to look at energy levels, right? If you're feeling super fatigued, you're crashing by 3 p.m., you're waking up in the middle of the night and having trouble falling asleep, that's likely a good sign that there's cortisol dysregulation present, right? And if all the above are, present for you, then training should be drastically reduced to no more than 3 to 4 times a week, ideally strength training primarily. Cardio should likely be reduced to 1 or 2 times a week, and would be more beneficial to be low intensity, nothing, really crazy high intensity. And if labs are showing low levels, a reverse diet is likely going to be warranted alongside making those training modifications. So that way you can start to actually have your body respond and heal. It doesn't mean you can't go back to, training a little bit more intenseful, and having some higher intensity stuff coming in and, training harder. But we need to make sure that recovery is there first. If you don't know what good recovery feels like, you're stuck in that mode of, oh, this just feels normal, right? Like this is just your norm. Maybe if you're not going to the bathroom every single day, you're not having regular bowel movements, to someone who's used to that for years, that feels normal. But until you know what good recovery feels like, what good bowel movements feel like, what having good steady energy levels feel like, you're never going to know when that starts to slip. You're so used to being in a low energy deficit state that just feels normal for you now. And it's easier to be able to stay on top of recovery when you know what good recovery feels like. But until we get into that boat, we need to make sure that we can set your training up to actually match what your body is able to recover from right now. And if you are in a state of overtraining while being under recovered, we need to understand that pulling back the training for a period of time can be super beneficial to make sure that we can kind of offset that, get recovery back. And then once we have better metrics, better hormone levels, your body starts to feel better, we have better energy, digestion regulates, then we can start to, with good recovery now, better diet metrics, better sleep, decreased stress load, then we can start to see cool, where is that upper tolerance of how hard you can train while maintaining that adequate recovery. That's most important. Okay. So if this episode helped you understand hormones and, how they all play a role in metabolic rate and your performance and recovery in a more practical way, subscribe on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Share this with a friend who keeps saying her metabolism feels slow, because this just might be the missing piece that she needs. If you learned something, please leave a quick rating and a 1-star, 1-sentence review, not a 1-star, 5-star if you can. 1-sentence review is your biggest takeaway. It helps more women obviously find the show. Screenshot this episode, tag me on Instagram, and tell me what hormone topic you want me to break down next. Resources and next steps are in the description below. You are built for better, and I will see you in the next one.